On the morning the bank sent its final notice, Thaddeus Wrenfield walked out to a field that had killed 3 men before him, and he did it with no hands at all. The men of Cobble Ridge stood at the fence line, laughing into their coffee, taking bets on how many days it would take before the High Meadow beat him too. What none of them knew was that by the time the fall harvest came in, that cursed slope of dirt would make Thaddeus Wrenfield the richest and most respected farmer in the county. Stay with me, because this story is about to show you why the land nobody wanted was the only land worth having. And if stories like this real grit, real farming, real American land are your kind of thing, hit subscribe right now, because you don't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Cobble Ridge, Kentucky sat where the Appalachian foothills folded into steep, stubborn hills, the kind of land that broke plows and broke men in equal measure. At the top of it, overlooking the whole valley, sat 60 acres known simply as the High Meadow, a slope so steep, so rocky, and so prone to washing out in a hard rain that no one in 3 generations had managed to grow more than a season's worth of weeds on it. Thaddeus Wrenfield had lost both his hands 9 years earlier in a grain auger accident on his father's farm, the same accident that took his father's life. He was 26 then. He was 35 now, and every person in town still saw him the way they'd seen him the week after the accident, as a man who used to farm, not a man who still could. He wore 2 steel hooks, custom forged by a blacksmith 2 counties over, fitted to leather cuffs that laced up his forearms. He could grip a shovel handle. He could thread a rope. He could, with enough patience, button his own shirt, though it took him 4 minutes some mornings. What he could not do, according to every single person who watched him inherit that ruined meadow from his uncle, was farm it. "He'll be dead or broke by August," said Silas Corwin, who ran the biggest cattle and grain operation in the valley, cattle on the hillsides, feed corn on his bottomland, and had wanted the High Meadow's water rights for a decade. Silas said it loud enough for it to travel, and in a town like Cobble Ridge, words traveled faster than weather. By the time planting season arrived, Thaddeus had $300, a second-hand walk-behind tiller he'd rigged with a modified harness, and a foreclosure notice from the Ridge County Farmers Bank taped to his refrigerator. One growing season, that was all the bank would give him. If he couldn't show a viable crop and a repayment plan by the fall harvest deadline, the land, his uncle's land, the last Wrenfield land in the county, would go to auction. Everyone assumed Silas Corwin would be the only bidder. Here's what nobody in Cobble Ridge understood about the High Meadow, and what Thaddeus had spent 2 winters learning from library books held open with his hooks and a reading stand he'd built himself. The meadow wasn't cursed, it was misused. For 3 generations, farmers had plowed the High Meadow straight up and down the slope, the way you'd plow flat bottomland. Every hard rain sent the topsoil sliding straight downhill into the creek, taking seeds, nutrients, and hope along with it. It was a mistake older than anyone living, the same mistake that had turned parts of the Dust Bowl into a national catastrophe a century earlier, when farmers stripped prairie grass and plowed straight lines across land that needed to be worked with the contour of the earth, not against it. Thaddeus had a different plan. He was going to till and plant along the natural contour lines of the slope, following the curve of the hill rather than cutting across it, a technique called contour farming. Done right, each row acts like a shallow terrace, catching rainwater and topsoil instead of losing them. Paired with strips of deep-rooted grass left standing between plots, it could turn the High Meadow's greatest weakness into its greatest asset, a slope that gathered water instead of shedding it. It would take him nearly twice as long to till with his hooks locked around the tiller's push bars, walking the curling, uneven rows instead of straight ones. Silas Corwin drove past twice a week just to see how far behind Thaddeus had fallen, and twice a week he stopped his truck at the fence to needle him. "You're wasting good seed on a graveyard, Wrenfield," Silas called out one morning in late April, watching Thaddeus guide the tiller with his forearms, sweat soaking through his shirt in the cool spring air. "Man needs hands to farm a hill like this." Thaddeus didn't look up, "Man needs a plan," he said. "I've got one of those." What Thaddeus was planting wasn't corn, and it wasn't tobacco, the two crops that had failed on that meadow for generations. He was planting a combination straight out of indigenous American agricultural tradition, a method sometimes called the Three Sisters: corn, pole beans, and squash, grown together in the same mounds. The corn stalks gave the bean vines something to climb. The beans, in turn, pulled nitrogen from the air and fixed it into the soil, feeding the corn. The broad squash leaves spread low across the ground, shading out weeds and holding moisture in the dirt during dry spells. Three plants, each one solving a problem the other two created a system some tribes in the eastern woodlands had perfected long before Kentucky was Kentucky. Between the mounds, Thaddeus planted strips of switchgrass, a native prairie grass with roots that could reach 10 feet into the ground, anchoring the soil against every hard rain the mountains could throw at it. For seed, he hadn't bought hybrid corn from the co-op like everyone else. He'd spent his last $200 on heirloom Cherokee White Eagle corn and Hidatsa Shield figure beans, drought-hardy varieties bred over centuries for exactly the kind of poor, thin mountain soil the High Meadow had. They wouldn't yield as much per acre as modern hybrids in good bottomland. But the High Meadow wasn't good bottomland, and Thaddeus wasn't trying to win a yield contest. He was trying to grow something that would actually survive. It was slow, brutal work. He rigged pulley systems in his barn to plant seed without fine finger movement, dropping kernels through a funnel he controlled with his elbow. He built a wheeled seat that let him drag himself along the rows on his knees when the ground got too steep and uneven for the tiller. Neighbors who drove past saw a man crawling through dirt with metal hooks for hands, and most of them saw only a spectacle. A few, not many, but a few started to notice something else. The rows weren't just planted. They were planted correctly, in a way none of the old-timers had ever bothered to do. One of those few was Delphine Ashgrove, the county's agricultural extension officer. A soil scientist who'd moved to Cobble Ridge from Ohio State 3 years earlier and had never quite been accepted by the old farming families. She drove up to the High Meadow uninvited one June afternoon, expecting to find disaster. Instead, she found contour rows holding firm after a night of hard rain, while Sila's Corwin's flat-plowed bottomland 2 miles away had lost 6 inches of topsoil into the creek. "You've been reading the old soil conservation bulletins," she said, standing at the fence with her boots already muddy. "The ones from back when the whole country was learning this lesson the hard way." "Library card," Thaddeus said. "Didn't cost me nothing but time." She crouched down and pushed 2 fingers into the dirt between the mounds. It came up dark and crumbled loose in her hand, instead of sliding off in a sheet the way hillside soil usually did after a rain. "Do you know how rare this is?" she asked. "Most of the erosion control literature never makes it past a university library. Farmers who need it most are usually the ones with the least time to go dig for it." "I had time," Thaddeus said. "Bank made sure of that." Delphine started coming back. Not to help him, he never let her touch a tool, insisting he'd do it or it wouldn't be his but to measure. Soil moisture, erosion rates, nitrogen levels. She was building a case, though she didn't tell him for what, not yet. Late July brought the storm that decided everything. 6 inches of rain fell across Ridge County in 11 hours, the kind of storm the local paper would later call a 100-year flood. Creeks jumped their banks. 2 bridges washed out. And on flat-plowed farms up and down the valley, farmers watched entire seasons of topsoil disappear downstream in a single night, including nearly a third of Sila's Corwin's bottomland corn, buried under mud and debris that had come pouring off the hills above it. Thaddeus spent the night in his barn, unable to do anything but listen to the rain hammer the tin roof and wonder if 9 months of work were washing away above him. At dawn, soaked and exhausted, he climbed the meadow expecting ruin. The contour rows had held. The switchgrass strips, roots laced deep into the hillside, had caught the runoff and slowed it, letting the water soak in instead of racing downhill. There was damage. A few mounds collapsed, some squash vines torn loose, but the corn stood. the beans stood, and critically, the soil stood. The very thing 3 generations of Wrenfields and their neighbors had lost to that slope year after year had, for the first time anyone could remember, stayed exactly where it was planted. Word got around fast. In a farming town, a field that survives a 100-year flood while the valley bottomland washes out is not gossip, it's news. Silas Corwin, who'd lost nearly a third of his crop, drove up to the High Meadow himself for the first time all season. He stood at the same fence where he'd mocked Thaddeus in April, looking at rows of corn taller than his truck, and said nothing at all for a long moment. "How?" he finally asked. "Contour lines," Thaddeus said, "grass roots, old seed bred for this dirt, and more time than most men would have given it." He paused. "Same information's in the library, Silas, same as it always was. Difference is I had a reason to actually read it." By September, the High Meadow produced its first real harvest in living memory, nearly 4,000 pounds of corn, beans, and squash off ground everyone in the county had written off as worthless. Thaddeus sold part of the heirloom corn as seed stock to Delphine's extension office, which was launching a pilot program to help other hillside farmers convert to contour planting after watching what the flood had proven. He sold squash and beans at triple the going rate to 2 restaurants in Lexington that wanted heirloom varieties grown without chemical fertilizer. And he walked into the Ridge County Farmers Bank 2 full weeks before his deadline with enough cash, contracts, and yield data to not only save the land, but to qualify for a small loan to buy the adjoining 15 acres land Silas Corwin had quietly been trying to acquire for himself. He didn't buy it to spite Silas. He bought it because for the first time in 9 years, farming wasn't something Thaddeus Wrenfield used to do. It was something he did, better than almost anyone in the valley, hooks and all. The following spring, 6 other hillside farmers in Ridge County converted their steepest, most unproductive acreage to contour planting, following a method Delphine had taped up in the extension office, credited plainly at the bottom. Developed and proven by T. Wrenfield, High Meadow Farm. Silas Corwin was one of them. The High Meadow wasn't cursed. It never had been. It was just waiting for someone patient enough and stubborn enough to work with the land instead of against it, and it turned out that took more heart than hands. If this story hit you the way it hit me telling it, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there are a lot more stories like Thaddeus Wrenfield's coming to this channel, stories about the land, the people who refuse to quit on it, and what it really takes to make something grow where everyone said nothing could. See you in the next one.